Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to see so many colleagues joining us for today's webinar. Thank you. Gosh, and the names keep appearing. I'm Sonia Gruel. I'm a PPMA board member, and I'm also the Director for People, Culture and Organisational Resilience at Swindon Borough Council. Our hosts for today are our wonderful PPMA partner, Penna. And Penna are part of the Adecco Group and will today also be introducing their sister company, LHH. We're delighted to have had Penna to be part of our PPMA, gosh, I can't get my words out today, PPMA webinar series during 2021. And I know that they have always welcomed and continue to welcome the opportunity to share the fabulous experiences with all of our PPMA membership. I will get there by the end of today, I promise. It's my pleasure now to be handing over to Fian to introduce the session and also to our guest speaker. So Fian, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sonia. As Sonia said, I'm Fian Faye and I lead the HR interim practice here at Penna. We will be taking questions at the end of the session, so please do use the chat function to post your questions to Russell. Today's session is focused on helping leaders and organisations get in shape for the future, and what a timely session it will be. So let me just tell you a little bit more about our speaker today. So this is Russell. Russell is a senior principal consultant at LHH Penna. Russell is a highly capable and commercially astute global leadership consultant with over 20 years experience in this sphere, having previously worked in management positions in-house. He has successfully led numerous large global projects as a strategic development consultant, project leader, facilitator, and executive coach. In doing so, he has gained wide experience of building strategic, long-term relationships with clients in terms of talent strategy, succession planning, leadership development, assessment, and inclusion and diversity. Russell offers highly tailored yet scalable solutions, inventively meeting each client's specific needs, while at the same time having measurable business impact. These challenges have taken him around the globe many times, working with entry-level managers through to leaders at C-suite in a range of industries. On a separate note, and I had to add this bit in, Russell was originally an actor and has appeared in a number of highly successful TV programs for both the BBC and ITV, as well as had a number of lead roles in theatre, including London's West End. So, on this Friday afternoon, we are in for a real treat, and I will now hand over to Russell.
Thank you so much, Fian. I was just thinking, I often listen to Desert Island Discs and people say after the introduction, I don't recognize myself. And then I gradually, as you were saying that, I do recognize myself. So welcome, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. Yeah, I work for LHH, stands for Lee Hecht Harrison, a sister company to Penna, with whom we've worked for many, many years. And I joined LHH almost to the day 5 years ago. Now, today, what we're going to be looking at is how organizations of any kind can really rebound. I'm always hesitant to say after the pandemic, because we don't know whether we are where we are in the pandemic. I was talking to people the other day, somebody said, we're halfway through now. And I thought, how do we know? That's like asking somebody in 1943, do you know you're halfway through the war? Of course they wouldn't. We just don't know where it is. But this idea of how we learn from the challenges that we faced in the last 18 months and how we rebound from that and have the agility to move forward with whatever the pandemic and other things throw at us, I think is important. This is the first time beyond world wars, I think, this first time the whole globe has experienced something more or less at the same time because we're so connected. So let me take you through then. Hopefully you'll see my slides pop up in a moment. Hi, can you just see that? Sonia, can you give me a thumbs up if you can see that? You can. Okay, so let's look at the rebound race. And why is this a race? I think it's not necessarily between organizations as such, but it's between how employees and employers view each other. I think that's certainly something we've started to see in 2021, that the way that, I mean, you've probably heard of the Great Resignation wave, as people who maybe didn't move in 2020 are now moving in 2021, but are also looking for different ways of interacting with their employer. So I think it's, yes, in a in a commercial perspective, you might be racing with a competitor. But I think more broadly than that, if you're not in that environment, if you're in the public sector and so on, that it's a different sort of race. So some ups and downs that my colleague Alex Hedelendi did some research into that are really kind of, I think, interesting in and of themselves, but particularly in how something can take us down. The sources, we'll send you the white paper that I've got, and you'll have the links to the sources as we go through, but they're various places. So 55% of workers experience chronic stress, an ongoing level of stress. 40% do not believe that changes introduced by an organization will have a desired effect. And 34% of employees trust employers less in more recent months. So we can see us, because of COVID, because of other things, people going on a downslope. However, the rebound part of this is within 2 years of the 2008 crash, 84% of businesses were within 80% of their pre-crisis value. So we can come back, history tells us. 78% indicate that their organization has responded appropriately so far to the pandemic. And 77%, almost the same, indicate that they have the information needed to adjust so far. But that so far means we need to keep things under review. So what we looked at LHH was maybe kind of 5 ingredients, 5 steps on that rebound race. And here they are. And I'll go into each in a bit more detail in a moment. To rediscover, articulate, and unite around the mission of the organization. In my experience of working in this area for just about 22 years, organizations are good at sending out what the purpose and what the mission is once, but often don't refer to it again. I think in the first part of the pandemic, what I noticed in my training practice and in my coaching practice was that suddenly people were bonded by a purpose of getting through the initial stages of the pandemic. We were all in that full lockdown, could only go out for an hour a day. People thought, right, let's pull together. That has somewhat dissipated in the last 18 months. And I think we need to make sure that we are proactively coming back to it. We need to empower individuals to use their strengths and become star players. This is increasingly to the forefront of conversations we're having about how do we move people away from what they feel they can't do. We still need to look at developing those, but focusing on what we can do. And that as being part of resilience, as we mentioned before. The idea of authentic leadership, of course, has been around as long as leadership has been around. But I think what people are looking for now is that ability to speak only in truth, both upwards and downwards and sideways, and living to that authenticity. Embracing failure, and I'll talk about this in a moment, and allow individuals to grow in a flow state so that they are always moving, they're always developing, and recognizing the human impact and keep the troops resilient in advance. I think this is something that was starting to happen pre-pandemic, the idea of work-related stress, and then moving into dealing with resilience. The pandemic has put rocket boosters under that, but a bit like going to the gym, you've got to keep going to remain fit. You've got to keep working on resilience to be able to draw upon it when required. So let me take you through in a bit more detail each of those stages. Rediscover, articulate, and unite around the mission. Only 42% of employees in a recent study knew their organization's vision, mission, or values. Now, that might seem quite a high piece, but I think we can affect it higher if we know why we're doing something and the purpose of our overall organization, or maybe more pertinently, our team. I think that's important. A man that got me into working with leaders, as I say, towards the end of the 1990s, is a guy called Tony Cockrell, Dr. Tony Cockrell. He's retired now. And he was talking about the way teams work is to be able to articulate a purpose, and that purpose is understood by everyone. And I think as we are moving into a rebound, I don't want to say a bounce back, but a rebound, I think we need to look at our organizations and our teams being able to articulate that purpose. Natasha, yes, we'll be sending both the slides. Actually, what we'll do is we'll send the white paper itself, because I've just taken the slides from that, and the white paper has got links to the research. So hopefully that's okay. Thank you, Natasha. So here, what Tony Cockrell was talking about is 3 things that make up an ideal team: purpose, process, and relationships. And I think if you're missing any of those, without purpose, we end up with headless chickens. Without processes, we can be quite chaotic. Without relationships, we're quite cold. So I think looking at rediscovering and uniting around the mission is important. To go further than that, we need to look at the what, the how, and the why that we are, both in kind of quite tactical perspectives, but also from a strategic perspective. So a what-centric employee environment, as you can see there, is employees operate in a process-centric way, but without even the end-to-end visibility of systems they work in. The employees are unable to connect tasks to customer outcomes. So a good thing to look at maybe from today is, are you a what-centric organization, just processing things through? And a case study there is Enron's focus on individuals' targets over mission, rigor, and process. And look what happened to Enron. If we look then at the how-centric, and there's a case study there for you to think about regarding Kodak, focuses on process compliance, stable metrics, operational procedure, existing capabilities and constraints, and so on and so forth. However, innovation is locked out by the operational control mechanisms designed to excel in pre-disrupted environments. So we are existing, and it's okay, this is how we do things, but it's not, I think, where perhaps we should be, even in considering this. So we've got there Tesla as a case study for a why-centric organization. So on a mission on behalf of the customer, cutting through received wisdom, existing processes, bureaucracy, and with the accepted limited poor norms of their industry. When I was working, said I was working all over the world, I was working in New Zealand a few years ago, and we had a big discussion with an energy supplier there about the difference between being customer focused and being customer driven. I think being customer focused, when I look back on it, is how centric, but being customer driven is why centric. So I think it's a good time now to start thinking about where our internal or external customers sit and how focused or driven we are by them. So let's move on to number 2, empower individuals to use their strengths and become star players. 29% higher profit in organizations with high strengths focus, and 8% employers who focus on strengths are 8% more productive. So I think this is a shift away when we're looking at interim reviews, annual performance reviews, and so on, from what people can't do, but actually reminding people of what they can do. So there's a big public sector organization I'm working with at the moment where we are helping them move to that strength survey piece. And it doesn't have to be a big strategic change. It can be in the small things as well, such as manager training, performance process updates, buddying systems, and so on. Moving on to number 3. This can perhaps be the most challenging area, engaging authentically and speaking only in truth, upwards and downwards. So found this statistic really fascinating. Only 58% of employees say they trust strangers more than their line manager. And I think that's really intriguing. So, I mean, why has that happened? How has it happened? And what can we do about it? Another statistic, a ratio of 1 to 22 of good versus bad comments, where transparency was described as low or inauthentic. And I think what moving to a hybrid situation, a hybrid way of working requires us is to actually increase our trust between ourselves and our employers, ourselves and our teams, and ourselves and our colleagues. Now, how do we actually do that? I was always wary as a consultant of saying, oh, let's talk about trust. And as a line manager as well, because often people push back on that. Are you saying we don't trust each other? What I've noticed in the last 3 years, actually, before COVID, is people want to talk about the idea of trust. And I remember, I think, yeah, it just occurs to me an HBR article that I worked around a few years ago said what people want when it comes to trusting a line manager is, yes, empathy, is, yes, understanding, but it's also the idea that the line manager will show courage in difficult times. So I think that's something to think about as well. Employees value radical or even negative certainty over prolonged ambiguity or anxiety. Even if things are changing not in a good way, as long as people know they can start to deal with it, as opposed to decisions being put off. Regardless of personality style, it's imperative that communications both upwards and downwards are factual, fearless and authentic. I'm often asked about, I'll just bring up the final diagram about EQ trumping IQ. I'm often asked about how people have, in inverted commas, difficult conversations. And my first response to that is don't see them as difficult, see them as necessary. I find it, in one respect, difficult to go to the dentist, but I know I have to go twice a year, if not more, as I get older. But these are necessary things that we need to do. Number 4, embrace failure, interesting one, and allow individuals to grow in a flow state. If I can recommend a book for you to read, if you haven't read it already, a guy called Matthew Syed wrote a great book called Black Box Thinking, which is about how organizations learn from mistakes. He talks about 2 big industries, the airline industry or the aviation industry and the medical industry globally. He wrote this book about 5 years ago, and then he looks at what we mean by risk and what we mean by failure and how we can learn from it. So as we say here, give yourself a license to iterate and expect failures. In a VUCA world, organizations must get comfortable with the concept of trying new things and working out whether they've worked or not, and then adapting. So I think the diagram I've got there is kind of failing upwards and learning to iterate and rethink things. I am not proposing that failure is based on people not being prepared, not doing their homework, not working hard. It's not that. It's not about indolence. It's about being willing to take experiments. All the great scientific advances in the world are based on experimental piece. And then, beg your pardon, so just extending that a little bit more and give your employees license to grow. So you've got the diagram we've got on the right, developing ability. If we don't do that in a escalating level of challenge, people become bored, frustrated, and so on. Anxiety and failure if we don't give people the support they need. Another piece about change, I was talking to an organization yesterday. I've said as people go through change, they need to feel reassured that they have the skills to operate in the new world, an incentive to move into that new world, and the resources to operate well. Organizations are really good at giving vision and action plans to a change, but sometimes miss out on those central core pieces which speak to embracing failures and allow people to grow, of skills, incentive, and resource. And then finally, I beg your pardon, 49% of employees at organizations with a growth mindset report their company fosters innovation. Interesting, you ask individuals, do you have a growth mindset? They'll all say, yes, I do. If you ask team leaders, your team have a growth mindset? They say, well, about 50%. If you ask employees generally, does your organization have a growth mindset? They'll say no. So how do individuals go from having a growth mindset to an organization not having one? It must be something to do with the culture and the expectations that are imbued there. And then finally, recognize the human impact of any change and keep the troops' resilience in advance. So as of May last year, nearly 40% of employees surveyed report their company has not even asked them how they're doing since the pandemic began. Hopefully that has changed. 57% of employees who said they were very stressed at work felt less productive and disengaged, while only 10% of low stress employees reported feeling this way. So keep an eye on the resilience. The last 2 years have been very tough. Where organizations fall down is blurring the lines between proactively identifying and mitigating gaps in resilience versus reactive care. So being on the front foot and working with mindfulness techniques, being aware of mental health cares and so on. I think that is continuingly and increasingly important. It's difficult to be fit in retrospect. We need to be fit proactively as well. So in my last minute or so, I'd like us just to have a bit of interaction with the 30 or so people who are on the call. If you're used to Zoom, you may know how to do this, but I'll talk you through it. If you take your cursor to the top of the screen and just hover it about there, you see a drop down. It might say something like you are viewing Russell's shared screen. To the right of that, it says more options or view options. If you click on that, one of the bars says annotate. Go to annotate, and it should give you one of the options is it might say stamp. It might have a tick or a cross or something on it. Click on that. And then what I'd like you to do is think about these 5 areas. And for your organization, just rank where you think you are seeing the organization against the 5 areas we've talked through. Are they united around a vision? Are you empowering strengths? Is it engaging authentically, embracing failure, so on and so forth? So, some strong things there. If you're having trouble just identifying the annotate button, you can pop things into chat where you think you're strong, where you think you need to develop. This is great. So as we're doing that, I'm very happy to take some questions. I think I'll introduce John Dilling as well with Penna. So we're both here to take some questions, either in the chat function or verbally.
Thanks, Russell. Brilliant insight. Really interesting as well. There don't seem to be any questions apart from sharing the slides, which I saw the report, and perhaps you can share that with everyone afterwards, which would be great.
Okay, yes.
So I think for me, I suppose, the really interesting and is it concerning sort of insight was around trust and managers maybe not being trusted and 58% trusting strangers more.
Yeah.
Was there any insight into that the other way round?
In what terms?
In terms of managers trusting their employees or their staff.
Not that we
saw. It's a two-way sort of two-way game, isn't it, really? And obviously with remote working as it now is.
Yeah. Not that we saw officially, but anecdotally, I can tell you, if I'm coaching, I've had 2 coaching calls this morning, both with Asia-based countries, and both are talking there about the line managers that report into them not really trusting people when they're working in a hybrid way. That is nothing to do with Asia. That's all around the world. I'm noticing that because I have a global coaching practice, and it's absolutely the same. People were forced to trust each other in the first lockdown, the full double lockdown, as it were. But now, as people are moving into a hybrid situation, I'm not quite sure I trust people to do that. A company that's operating on the south coast of England, on Wednesday or Tuesday, I was working with them, and they were saying exactly the same. How do I build that trust? And of course, then employees are saying, well, if you don't trust me, I think I'll find an organization that does. So I think that's something we've got to have a mind shift about that, especially line managers. What needs to change for line managers in allowing that openness, that kind of freedom is the wrong word, but that latitude. So Paul's got a question there. Is there a notable difference between the private and public sectors? No, not as far as we've seen so far. I think there are strong similarities between both. Absolutely. So not as far as I've seen, Paul, but great question. Thank you. Any other questions from people?
There don't seem to be. Probably you've answered them all.
Maybe we've done that. What I would say is, for people who've marked the screen we see in front of us in somewhat, And so there's a lot around embracing failure and so on and so forth. A question I would ask people here is, how could you move the somewhat to the definitely? So have a think about that and maybe put your responses into the chat function. So whichever it is, I've just highlighted number 4, embracing failure, but if the other 3 as well, how could you move things forward into definitely? What do some of your organizations need to do more of? So I'll throw the questions back over to the folks on the piece.
We've had another question.
Yeah, we have. So Louise, thank you.
Yeah.
How the question is, how have organizations ensured that informal learning and culture is continued in a virtual way of working? Patchily, I have to say, Louise, I think people are still coming to terms with that. And I really should write more deeply about it, I've been fascinated by how the in-between moments that we all took for granted when we work face-to-face, people have really missed when working virtually. Now, what do I mean by that? So if we go for a team meeting, when I was based in, or still am, but when I was in the office at Grace Church Street, I'd think, oh, it's 12 o'clock. I'll get or 5 to 12, I'll get my notebook, get my laptop, whatever, and I'll go to meeting room A. That process, I then bump into John, I bump into Sonia, we have a quick chat, there are not enough chairs in the room, we go and get those chairs, then we get settled about 2 minutes past 12, and off we go. But that interim, those 5 or 6 minutes, that's a really informal way in which we learn about each other and what's going on. Now, of course, with Teams and Zoom, it starts bang, straight on 12 o'clock, in we go, and somebody's talking, you're a bit late, and we don't have that. So it's patchily, Louise, that people are trying to revisit those areas. I think what will happen is, as we get into more hybrid meetings, that is half the team in the same space and half the team scattered all over the place, that's when we'll start to learn about that. But people are still learning about it. But thank you, Louise, great question.
It seems to me, Russell, with a lot of this and some of these questions as well, when you're talking about getting through to these different stages on your chart here as well, is it not purely around communication, engagement, and being able to facilitate all of that? Do you feel?
I think it's about understanding. If I go into an organization, 9 times out of 10, they'll say, Russell, the problem with this place is communication. So you sit there for a day and there's a million emails. There are more meetings than you could shake a stick at. So actually there's a lot of communication, but sometimes there's no understanding. And also communication, I think, can sometimes be a code word for some other things. So I think what the disruption of the last 2 years has offered us is a time for organizations to ask the question, not how do we communicate but with each other, but how do we understand each other? And I think if we pose that as a big question, then other things might fall into place. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, perhaps better understanding creates smarter communication.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. So I just noticed it's 12:30, so people may be wanting to leave now. I'd just like to say thank you so much for the time today. We will share the white paper with you rather than the slides. The white paper's got more links and videos to watch and things to think about. So thank you everyone for letting me join you.
Thank you so much, Ross. I think, as John says, you've summed it up beautifully. It was extremely thought-provoking, I think actually empowering, and those some really inspiring words. I think that's a lot of information for us to take into how we view 2022 and what has been the effect on everyone during the last 18 to 2 years. So we'll look forward to hearing more, I guess. As for everyone joining us, thank you for attending, and please do look out for our future webinars in collaboration with the PPMA that we'll be hosting throughout 2022. Sounds a bit strange saying that, but I guess all that remains is for me to wish you, your family and your friends all the very best for the festive season, and we'll see you in 2022, if not before.
Absolutely. So thank you very much, everyone. Have a good weekend.
Thanks, Russell.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.